remember from initially when I was just starting to run some of these programs, and we were brainstorming on, given that the stages were running well, our pilots had run pretty well, and then it was a time when we were looking at phase 2, phase 3 of the program, when we were maturing it. It was time to also think of what can we measure. Now, threat modeling being threat modeling, it is different. Threats are different from vulnerabilities, as many of us in security understand. But when you start executing that on ground and start finding your respective threats and addressing them as well, there would come a time, especially for security teams or security leadership and even engineering leadership, where you're talking about how threats are reducing from time to time. Yeah. So, from the perspective of measurement, I wanted to know, what should we measure as a part of the process?
I think a key one that's simple to measure is what sort of issues, when you go through threat modeling early in the design or pre-development stages, if you find an issue, you've saved a lot of time, right? Because if you think about traditional security where post implementation of a solution into production or into an environment, you find the issue, and then what do you have to do? You have to remediate it in N+1 version of that code base, right? Or that environment. And so you have to patch something, or you have to, change the code base and fix it. If you can find a flaw that's obviously going to be a true positive, and you get concerted agreement that, hey, this is an issue, and it actually maps to a threat in your threat library, this is one of those, like, well, I mean, I don't like prideful moments because it's such a bad, quality, but it's one of those moments where you can basically hang your hat up on and say, you know what, as a security champion, I thought this through and I brought this team together to see a design issue, a permission issue, a configuration issue that actually substantiates a threat in my threat library. The key thing here is that one metric is, did I define a threat library that makes sense to my stakeholders? I think that's a key metric where the stakeholders are like, yes, we do not want these threats to happen. Great. That is a milestone. Next is like, did you find something with earlier on in the SDLC where it didn't have to, go to production. It didn't have to go through remediation queues. It was found during the design or development phase, right? Or pre-development phase. And so that is a great metric, right? Because you're saving so much time. The amount of time it takes to do remediation. So there's remediation management, that takes time. There's remediation queues, right? Where the developer has to stop what they're doing on N+2, the next version of a great product that you're working on. They have to go back, right, to a current deployed model of N minus
Yeah.
whatever, and they have to fix that. That's not where you're making your promises of features that your customer wants. You're having to go back, right? That takes a lot of time. You can unitize that and say, we just saved 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours. Then that's actual money, right? Being able
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
understand how you're saving time, those are some simple metrics where you can basically hang your hat on and really, present that to, senior level executives and those that are sponsoring threat modeling in your organization.
Yeah. I think there are very, very far reaching effects of what you're talking about. I think when in the long term, it really helps when you have reduced these timelines, rather than mindlessly throwing threats at the developers, understanding what it takes to remediate, having the right quality of threats from time to time, having all of that as a part of the metric gives, I think, a little more accurate picture of the actual risk that might be there, but also at the same time looking at how to make it sustainable. There were there were a few things we were thinking of which were in similar lines, including the recovery time and stuff that you talked about, the remediation timelines and all of that. But we were also thinking, of what are the metrics in terms of the behavioral change that we have brought about in the developers. So there's one thing that you can say that the number of threats are high, or they will go down over a period of time. But the idea is that how iteratively are you actually picking up a bunch of features and doing threat modeling. So that was one of the things that we were looking at, which was quite eye-opening, because having that as a part of the process and having that in your muscle memory. Like, if you are doing agile development, you have a quick set of features, you just get into a room, do whiteboarding, it becomes a part of the process, and it defines how much you are actually thinking about security. So in some cases, you would know that once you define a metric, there is a risk of teams trying to achieve that metric. Like, for example, with vulnerabilities going down, you may have threats that they either are discovering lesser threats because now they don't want to be in the limelight where they're accountable for many threats or remediations, but rewarding them for following that instinct of doing the threat modeling in the first place. So how frequently are they doing threat modeling also matters, because now it's become a part of the process, which was more important than the threat itself in many cases.
Absolutely. I think you just mentioned a diamond nugget for everyone on listening in because, you know, the threat modeling, unlike other activities in security, provides a collaborative and educational aspect to it where it can actually change perception and behavior to your point. And, definitely that is a bigger metric than chasing metrics related to, threat reduction, threat identification metrics, and things like that. Still important, all those metrics are. But when you get to basically get developers and architects to now think about, wait, how is this going to affect my threat model with their own words, right? With their own form of thinking within their own respective, circles in the architectural review board or stand-ups in development meetings. Then now you're fostering change, right? And that becomes cultural and that becomes a lot more sustainable because when you have product teams now begin to use the same vernacular of like, wait, will this change? Does it require me to reevaluate my threat model on your own versus having to be helicopter parented by the security champion who may go on vacation, may not be available, might be looking at other products. But if you can basically create a culture where they're thinking about their threat model and how that's reshaping how they're designing, how they're configuring, how they're patching, how they're, hardening, how they're doing everything with related to product management, that I think is so much more important. And it's a golden point that you mentioned.